It's been a long day, and arguably it's the morning right now, so I'll finish this out with one last blog. And I was about to write this, and I immediately realized, just intuitively, it was practically coming out of the text itself, um, as an intuitive perception, uh, that this would work best in the spoken word, that it was kind of clawing its way up out of the written word, and if I tried to write it out, of course, it would have just been an aesthetic mess, because this needs to be said, I think. And this will conclude what I hope to be my long-standing frustrations with this movement in the progressive culture of believing in the mimetic virus of racism. I remember when this was first reintroduced to me, as though it were a contemporary thing, that it was introduced in the context that of anyone who believes racism to be absent is a fool. And thankfully, I learned that a number of my peers didn't really consider this speech to have been a very good speech. This was delivered in an infamously politically correct community. So, at the time, I was very interested in the notion of being a fool and playing the fool. It's even better in a sense than playing devil's advocate, because playing the fool, you're less direct. People perceive you to be in some way ignorant, but as has been pointed out time and time again, individuals such as, well, should I state it, Lao Tzu or someone like that, the fool is actually very wise. And the vulgar are luminous, knowing, but I alone appear dull and confused. It's interesting also how our habits influence us. I already regret, in a sense, mentioning Lao Tzu by name in the spirits and hopes of being academic, because I know my motives for it. I mentioned someone from an Asian country, and all of a sudden I seem less stereotypical. Although, of course, my father has been described by an Asian man as looking as though he were Asian. Makes you really wonder at times who you really are. And then you realize it's kind of like asking yourself, am I a hipster or an indie kid? It's completely arbitrary. Anyone who believes in the existence of racism is not only a fool, but is a danger, and must be silenced. And this is, I think, appropriate for me about 10 months after the fact of having heard this argument, that it still exists, as though it were a concrete property, as though it were a physical property, an empirical property, that I use the same rhetoric, otherwise it wouldn't be a circular reasoning, would it? The rhetoric being, of course, an inversion of what had originally been said, that anyone who believes that racism does not exist is a fool. No, it's actually anyone. I'm just going to say what I should have had the courage to say back then. Anyone who projects one's personal prejudices onto the world is a fool. And a fool in the bad sense of the word. Anyone who can't take any psychological responsibility for one's own prejudices and must project them onto human nature. Anyone who lends a false sense of authority to a group of people who are all equally neurotic, but pretend towards some sense of solidarity, and even in opposing them, lends them and validates their illusions to solidarity by claiming them all to suffer from the same ailment, rather than trying to infiltrate their system, and to point out that there is no structure or agreement between them. and anyone who seeks agreement or structure within one's own system, which only exists in opposition to theirs. Anyone who competes with others in a game of I am more equalist and therefore more equal than you. It's the same hypocrisy, this whole notion that you can attain equality eventually if you can only force other people into it. Yet how do you know at any one moment that they're not already there and you're not knocking them down? Because these transitions can happen within a few seconds. Within the course of a single day, we could solve all the problems in this country, and within this world, if we really set our minds to it. I refuse to believe that with such stifling boredom, that's not possible. Isn't that boredom a symptom of what we could be doing? This is my conclusion, my verdict, that anyone who believes in something so illusory as racism or sexism is just dangerously deluded, much like those same people who believe themselves to be racist or sexist. Don't agree with them, don't lend them an excuse. If they're going to be violent, don't lend them an excuse. And don't judge of their souls. If you don't know them, judge of their actions, right? This is what you do when you believe racism to exist, to be a truth. Two things. First of all, you unify all of these people who are all deluded in their own ways, just so that you might feel a sense of unity and solidarity with people in your group of progressives, so that you might feel a sense of superiority. Or did I say superiority before? I meant solidarity, but superiority to those people, because you're practically essentializing people. Because you know that those other people are prejudiced in ways that you are not. Forgetting, of course, that you have no access to them, their identity as subjects, you have no access to their minds. You have access to their actions, but if you had their subjectivity, you would become them. If you knew what they were perceiving, it would only be through perceiving the world the same way. And thankfully, I don't think that all of you perceive the world the same way, because individuals are too different from one another. And it's because of these differences, because of these complexities, and because, of course, the underlying unity of these differences, that people can never be categorized except by a delusional hack and a proto-fascist. And thankfully, the proto-fascist will always fail because no two people can share the same delusions. A delusion depends upon the estrangement of oneself from other people, from intersubjectivity, and from empathy. And if you could surmount your delusions, you would recognize just how disparate people really are, and how they defy categorization at every moment. Not to say that we can't generalize to some degree about styles of personality, types of personality, and trends that people follow. But fundamentally, there cannot be reduced to bureaucratic constructs. And, there seems to be a cycle at work here too. Because in the same way that by surmounting one's prejudices, one recognizes the individuality of everyone around us. Just by seeking solidarity with people, one realizes how lonely one really is in one's own prejudices, even amongst other people who pretend towards those prejudices. It's like two paths that lead to the same conclusion. The fool who persists in his folly will become wise. Realize that no one's fucking racist. Human beings are essentially good. But the mimetic virus that says that other people are racist, that it exists but I'm not a part of it, that it's a remote object, not an adverb to describe my thinking, not peculiar to me, but objectively out there, and that somehow its existence justifies my prejudices and my cruelty and my bad behavior, this is what's got to end. For racism does not exist, but the presumption that it does is the origins of all the problems ascribed to it. It is a reification. But that process of reification is at the root of the problem. But here's the real seriousness of the problem. That when you're guilty of this, then the people most intimate to you are now essentialized within only your view. Because for you and your paranoia and your prejudice and your suspicion to accuse others whom you have not known personally of harboring these labels, of harboring these categories, of harboring these political convictions and these delusions, of harboring these narratives, these interpretations of history and of language, of inhabiting this world that you believe yourself to be a victim of because you refuse to rise up against people who are assholes to you. By so doing, you are the one essentializing the people most intimate to you, including yourself. Because like I said, you'll never know what someone else's delusions are. You can only project your own. You don't know what white means or what black means. You don't know what brown means or what yellow means or what red means. Admit it. But you can invent that out of your own paranoia and your own insecurity. And you expect other people to see your beloved or your family or you or other people in the same way, so that you might have an illusion of solidarity with these people. And that is the root of your evil, that you share in common with your own opponents, because of your own competitive nature, which however you can surmount by owning up to your own individuality, to the fact that these categories don't exist in the real world, and therefore anyone who believes them to exist is alone. There's no common racism that unifies these people, and there's no true solidarity you have with your progressive friends. Your attempt to attain that solidarity is just as bad as the people and the societies that you've projected upon, that you claim to stand in opposition to, the clans and the gangs. Of course, the clans and the gangs should be disbanded, but not because they're racist, not through hypocrisy, not through the very shadow projection that created Nazism and all of these things. They're judging their actions, not their souls. For you usually have no access to their souls, and what is a prejudice? Not to presume upon that kind of access. You don't have that kind of power. As far as I'm aware, the whole history of prejudice has been an attempt to just hoard power amongst one another and to lord it over people. You don't know anything about the person that I love. We don't even know, because she was adopted, what her ethnic background is. Looking at me, if you think I'm white, how do you know that? How do you honestly presume that? You don't know anything about my cultural background, and how do you know how I self-identify? There is nothing left for you to judge. You don't know the auspices under which I've met my lover. I might easily have been drawn to a woman of a different color or hue before then. Really, I'd like to I'd like to devote this and dedicate this to my prospective marital partner, to whom I don't necessarily feel an aggressive entitlement, although some. Because am so shocked by my own delusions that I think that anyone would have a prejudice against her because of the color of her skin or her hair. Or that they presume something if we ever were to date about the both of us, when they don't know anything about the auspices of our meeting. They don't know about the differences that unite us. And they know nothing about even you, what your background is, because you don't even know that. It's a mystery. I'd like to think, and I'm absolutely certain that it's not the same as my background. Though my apprehensions were that at some point or another that it might have been. There's no such thing as race, there's only culture. And gradations of culture and individuality and all of these differences. Maybe people are justified in discriminating based on culture, but you have no business judging them for discriminating based on something that does not exist. And the moment you presume such judgment to exist, you validate the supposed existence of that same criterion. You can't argue that other people are racist if you don't believe in race, because you'll never have empirical evidence that that's so. And even if they believe themselves to be racist, you have every right to call them crazy. I'm not white. The person I'm in love with is not white unless she chooses to identify that way. And hell, the first girl that I met, that I dated, was she white or was she Hispanic? I don't know, but I had a fascination with Hispanic women for a long time after that. But that was a form of prejudice, you know. And meeting this other person was I suppose paler, if my senses don't lie. That put an end to that prejudice. I was excited to think that maybe she was of Irish descent or something like that. Because Ireland was something so foreign to me. And apparently those were the original blacks anyway. It's really absurd, the degree to which people project these naive categories, ignorant of the truly mysterious circumstances leading to people's chance encounters, as though presuming that God himself saw things through this lens. Why would I ever believe something like that when I don't even perceive the world that way? Literally, the peculiarities of such a situation are moving not because the other person is an it, because that person's a thou. Not some us and them mentality, but an I and thou mentality. Even when it slips into the it mode, is still so peculiar and individuated. And there are few things I have as much conviction in as at this moment, that anyone who thinks it's okay to just force people into those categories of it is a fool, in the worst sense of the word, and a danger. Not just to people in general, but to one's own loved ones and to one's own self. There is no such thing as race, and there is no such thing as racism.